Good afternoon and welcome back to INSA's week-long New IC Empowering Women and Engaging Men Virtual Symposium. Today's session is a discussion on diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion in the IC. Now please welcome INSA's Executive Vice President, John Doyen.
Good afternoon and welcome to day 2 of the New IC Empowering Women and Engaging Men Symposium. We had a terrific start yesterday with our IC Trailblazers panel, and we continue this afternoon with a session opened to the entire community. So for those of you joining us for just this program, and we have more than 700 people registered today, welcome. We value your participation. Yesterday, our speakers talked about their experiences as trailblazers, sharing their stories of breaking down barriers and effecting change in their organizations. Today, we'll hear from public and private sector leaders who are implementing diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion programs and policies that are driving necessary change. And along the way, they are strengthening our nation's resilience, improving outcomes, and achieving mission success. Before we begin, I have some brief housekeeping items. First, we encourage audience participation. If you have questions, please submit them through the questions box on the right side of your screen. And also, we're pleased to welcome members of the press to the call today. And this is a reminder that this program is on the record. And finally, I'd like to thank all of our sponsors, Booz Allen Hamilton, Esri, Exeter, GDIT, Guidehouse Mantech, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon Intelligence and Space, and SAIC. We could not deliver this kind of programming without the support of our partners. Now, I'm pleased to welcome my good friend, Teresa Shea, Vice President of Cyber Offense and Defense Experts for Raytheon Intelligence and Space, who will introduce our moderator. Teresa, over to you.
Thanks so much, John. I am so excited to be here, and Raytheon is so pleased to be able to sponsor this week's program. I want to start by thanking INSA for bringing together these awesome leaders from both the public and private sectors to really continue this very important conversation in our community. Like INSA, all of us here at Raytheon Technologies have been participating in these global conversations on diversity, equity, and inclusion, really working to create that environment and culture where all employees can be themselves and really share ideas openly. After all, we are stronger together. Stronger because of the unique backgrounds, experiences, and talents of every employee. Stronger when we make room at the table for those diverse voices and when we allow that space to listen. So I'm really energized and inspired by these leaders INSA has brought together for the panel today. And I really look forward to this discussion. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Chris Armstrong. Chris is the co-owner of Veritas Culture and a sought-after consultant, facilitator, speaker, and coach in the areas of organizational culture and diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. He has been called to assess and facilitate in very highly charged national level situations to include the Charlottesville race riots, the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd, and the Kavanaugh confirmation. All told, Chris has facilitated more than 5,000 culture sessions across more than 190 government, nonprofit, and private sector organizations. And previously, he was the culture executive for both NGA and DIA, and he served as the diversity executive for DIA. Please welcome Chris Armstrong.
Don't know what to say after that, but thank you very much, Teresa. It really is an honor, and I'm looking forward to bringing on our panel members who have as much experience and certainly a lot more current direct experience than I'll ever have. So let's get them in the picture, shall we? And as we're getting them in, I'll just tell everybody today's song of the day is going to be 7 Whole Days by Tony Braxton. If you know anything about my facilitation, you'll know what that means. So let's welcome first Welcome first, Bridget Chapman. She serves as a Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Corporate Social Responsibility for SAIC. In this role, she leads the development and execution of policies and programs that maximize the organization's equity and belonging. As well, let's introduce Vieta Williams, who is the Director of the Human Development Directorate at NGA. In this role, she partners with NGA leadership to create and sustain a human resource system that is in alignment with NGA's business strategy, culture, NSG, and NGA strategies. Also with us today is Megan Flannery Hayes, who serves as a department head and principal investigator at ARL, where she oversees the conducting of basic and applied research in systems engineering and program management roles. Try to say that fast. Scott Nykem serves as the executive leader for diversity, equity, and inclusion at GDIT. In this role, he is responsible for the enterprise diversity and inclusion strategy. And finally, Liz Brooks is the Director of Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion for the National Security Agency, Central Security Service. In this role, she leads the development and execution of policies and programs that maximize the organization's equity and belonging. So thank you all for being panel members today. And as we get this conversation going, and before I get to the first question, I'll just let everybody in the audience know, we're going to try to do sort of a first panel discussion to get us started for about 20 minutes, and then we'll get to your questions, I promise you. So again, put them in the chat room that you see on the right-hand side. Welcome, panel members. And starting with you, Ms. Williams, can you just let us know, briefly introduce yourself beyond the very high-level introduction I gave, and tell us a little bit about the experience and expertise you bring to today's conversation.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for allowing me to be here. So again, I'm Vieta Williams. I'm an NGA careerist. I've been with NGA for over 25 years, primarily in the human resources profession. And so I've seen from the hiring and onboarding of our IC professionals to starting their next chapter in their lives to retirement, the whole life cycle that an employee experience brings, and been involved in helping to set policy, to run a myriad of programs that contribute toward creating a diverse environment for the last 25 years, as well as working with partners across the IC on several programs to continue to build inclusion and sense of belonging as well. So I'm happy to be here, and I look forward to sharing with you some of our best practices at NGA.
Okay, over to you, Liz.
Well, hi, I'm Liz Brooks, and before I say much about me, I would like to just frame a little bit by just a statement or two about our agency. So I work at the National Security Agency, and we have two critical national security missions. The first of that is, for those who are not familiar, it's foreign intelligence, and so we are focused on providing insights about foreign actors and that may have a desire to do us or our allies harm. And our second mission is our cybersecurity mission, which we focus on protecting national security systems and information, protecting our national secrets. And we do that in a variety of ways. And I think the thing that really makes that, that we're proud of and is unique is that we are the nation's code makers. So I've worked in a variety of mission spaces over the past 37 years, but for the past 3 years, I've been serving as the Director of Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion. And so, as our director often says, both of those missions that we talk about are team sports. And we really believe that. And my job, I would say, in part, as the Director of Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion, is to make sure nobody's left on the bench. We want to make sure that this is a place where everybody feels like they are valued, included, and that they belong. And I'm very honored to have that opportunity to serve in that capacity, and I'm very honored to be a participant in today's panel. So thanks.
No, thank you. And over to you, Scott.
Thanks, Chris, in getting to follow those comments, especially Liz. When you said it's a team sport, that describes how I cut my teeth in some of the work that I did leading up to leading in diversity, inclusion, and giving at GDIT, coaching teams to bring voices to the table, to understand what needs to be brought into a team to innovate and do the other things that are necessary to be the highest performing teams they can. So we are a team sport at GDIT2. We serve all parts of the federal government. And I think our success is linked. Our ability to do everything that Liz just talked about is linked with the way that we have to think about what GDIT does. And so my background is in executive coaching, team facilitation, and organizational strategy. And over the last year, I stepped into the lead role for diversity and inclusion and giving. And I'm excited to join this esteemed panel and share a little bit about our lessons too, like I said a moment ago, and what we're focused on. And I want to learn from everyone here as well. Thanks, Chris.
No, thank you. Bridget, over to you.
Great, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm just delighted to be here with this panel today. I too, as Scott, looking very forward to our rich discussion and learning as well. Again, I'm Bridget Chapman. I'm with SAIC, and over the past 28 years, I served more on the sector side, business development, capture, corporate strategy, operations. And it was recently that I moved over to diversity, equity, and inclusion as my primary role, but it's not new to me. I literally grew up in an environment where my grandparents and parents marched with Dr. Martin Luther King. Social and community activism was always part of my upbringing. And for the past 5 years, I've led the Women's Employee Resource Group. I've always been a fierce champion of women and minorities having a seat at the table and having a diverse leadership team. And so I'm thrilled that our CEO, Nazik King, tapped me to lead this role because I've always championed causes in SAIC to advance, again, women and minorities. And so, again, I'm leading that charge for SAIC. I've been very passionate about underserved communities, closing achievement gaps, working with HBCUs, and just in humanitarian issues. So again, I bring a different spin or perspective to the conversation, having started out in the sectors and now have moved into this role. So again, I'm looking forward to a very rich discussion.
And Megan.
Yeah, hi. My name is Megan Flannery Hayes, and similar to Bridget, I come from a different perspective as well. As you can tell from my title when Chris introduced me, I have a very technical role here at the Applied Research Lab at Penn State, which is we're a Department of Defense University Affiliated Research Center, or UARC, and we do also work with and support all different aspects of the federal government. And I personally have used sort of my leadership roles, any platforms that I have had to work with my colleagues and coworkers to advocate for change, more from like a grassroots perspective, really seeing kind of what's happening on the ground, what we feel and experience day to day, and how we can put together different thoughts and perspectives, initiatives to share them with leadership and try and bring about cultural change that way. So I've kind of come into DEI initiatives and other work like that from that perspective, and different things we've done at work. I co-founded a women's group at ARL back in 2018. That was in direct response to a cultural survey that we did, trying to bring women and other underrepresented groups together for networking and other mentorship type activities. And from that really snowballed, and we ended up with an initiative that went all the way up to the highest levels of Penn State. We managed to get the first paid parental leave program at Penn State started in 2020. So that's my background. For me, when I first started, I'm at ARL now. When I first started working, I was an analyst, a science, technology, and weapons analyst within the IC. And I was very lucky to come into an environment where my director, my deputy director, a lot of my colleagues were women, were underrepresented folks. I could visually see, right? There's a visual representation of someone who looked like me in a role that I wanted to get to in the future. I had that inspiration. I had those mentors. And for me, it's about trying to create that for that next generation of folks coming into the IC.
So the best thing about a great panel is they form the questions for you, right? So we've heard everything from seat at the table to this is a team sport to Liz saying no one's left on the bench to Vieta kicking us off with belonging, which is a word that's not used often enough in this space. So I'll start with you, Bridget. When you think about belonging as a, in addition to diversity and inclusion, but just focused on belonging, what are some of the things that you've seen done that really help give a sense of belonging to underrepresented groups?
When I think of belonging, I see that as it's in parallel to inclusion. And so for belonging, it's really getting that sense of not only are you a contributor, but you can really thrive in an organization and that you fit. Some examples of how we try to incorporate belonging in SAIC is through our champion network of employee resource groups. And that's a vital way to get that sense of belonging where your perspective, your voice can be heard, that you have every opportunity to grow in an organization and contribute and be heard and advance. Some other things that are critical to belonging is ensuring that your everyday experience in your organization, again, you fit and you have a role. So belonging is critical to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We treat it in SAIC as part of inclusion, not necessarily separate, but we have built education and experiences around belonging for our employees, particularly women and the underrepresented. It's key that we attract the best talent, and to do that is to retain them through creating a culture of belonging.
Okay, and Vieta, I see a head nod from you. So what would you add to this?
Not much. Bridget said it all. But I will attempt to continue this, her response. When I think of belonging, I want to go back to what Bridget said about the everydayness. I see the belonging in the sense of inclusion, such as diversity being asked to the party and inclusion being asked to dance at the party. And, and to be able to be given those opportunities to be able to thrive in the workplace and have an opportunity to voice and be a voice and be heard and have your voice be taken action upon for the good of the whole. I think it's intentional as well. It doesn't happen when we do an event where all of a sudden we're now having to create a sense of belonging, but it's intentional on a individual and collective platform, because belonging could resonate with two people in terms of sharing ideas, giving voice to what the other is saying, actively listening to what they're saying, and taking action to a collective action to ensuring that we build a workplace that is inclusive and allowing folks to be able to have that psychological safety to ensure that their voices are heard. So when I hear of belonging, it's really allowing me to be who I am and being a part of that team that Liz talked about so that we can move forward together.
And Megan, reading your more expanded bio, I noticed you had won a lot of mentorship awards. So I want to ask a direct question to you. Let's say that you're mentoring a leader who is struggling with how to elicit or garner a sense of belonging, right? They're having a struggle with allowing people to be their authentic selves. What is one piece of advice you would give that leader who came to you and said, I need some mentorship?
That's a great question. So to kind of build on what Bridget and Vieta said, for me, belonging is being able to bring your whole self to work, to not feel like any part of you needs to be hidden or tucked away or that any part of who you are holds up where you're going, right? So I think for a leader in a mentorship position, talking to someone else, I think it's getting to know that person. And it's creating that safe space where they can talk about themselves and who they are and different parts of themselves, and ask a lot of questions and get them to talk about themselves, less about advice, more about asking questions and eliciting from them who you are and where you want to be and where you see yourself going, or what you see reflected in, or what are your biggest challenges? What is a challenge for you on a daily basis? And then really to use the phrase we had to use, active listening, right? Listening to what they have to say, taking it in, asking follow-up questions, but letting them build on where they want to go, and have that kind of safe space where then they can share that. So there's no parts of themselves or who they are or what they've done or what else they're interested in that they can't bring to that workspace. And then that lets them, I think, open up a little bit more and bring more to that conversation and help you navigate that with them.
Sounds like a true facilitator. Listen to understand, don't listen to respond. So Liz, in your 3 years, my guess is you've listened to understand a lot of people. What struggles do you see some leaders having in creating that or enabling that authentic environment that Viet and Bridget really talked about?
Well, I think some leaders are, just not as practiced at this. So that's one of the things that we are trying to do, is to help give them a framework to make them comfortable to be engaged. And so one of the things we've done at NSA is we're taking an approach that's really a top-down, bottom-up approach. If you kind of equate it to a cake, layers of a cake, that bottom layer is where we are. From the sense of belonging, we focus on the lowest level, the individual employees, and helping them see themselves not as just members of the team, but co-owners of that team. And so, I would say belonging also has this aspect of ownership. It's your culture too. You're part of it. And so, one of the things that we are doing to help at all levels, really, not just our senior leaders, is to give them a framework for engagement. And at the lowest level, that individual employee, we have adopted what the OD&I Small Steps program, which is designed about individual involvement. And it creates a framework for a personal DEI journey, if you will. It's built on 4 dimensions. So the first is generating awareness about biases and what the impact of biases might be, but then what personal biases people might have. And then it focuses on exposure. So how can they, what steps could they take to broaden their network and to be more familiar with people who might be different than they are? And then the next aspect of that journey that they might develop for themselves is taking some action. So they might decide to join an employee resource group, or to do some particular reading or listening to podcasts, or writing blogs. And then the final portion of that is focused on social accountability. So it's great to have all those other elements, but a lot of times we struggle with really the follow through. And so having an accountability partner in some way to make sure that you stick with it. So that's that bottom layer. That middle layer that we talk about that provides a framework both for seniors and for other employees. In that middle, we're really talking about organizational level, work units. And what we have in place to provide some framework and support for that level of engagement is our employee resource groups. We have 11 different ones with chapters across the globe. And those are a great way for, to identify barriers, to help us with our recruiting, and to create that sense of value for differences. And so that invites individual employees to participate, it invites organizations to participate, and it connects to our senior leaders because we have senior advocates and sponsors associated with each of those employee resource groups. So it's a great way to kind of connect the bottom and the top. And then at that very top layer, I would say that's where our senior leaders are so important. And the tone at the top matters a lot. We have great support from our director, deputy director, on down. But then we have a lot of support from our senior leaders, and what we've given them in terms of a framework to help them be more comfortable in this space is we have had them commit to diversity inclusion objectives in their performance plans. And then we took it a step further, and they actually get evaluated separately on their performance against those diversity inclusion plans outside of the rest of their performance evaluation. And so, you know, in the spirit of what gets measured gets done, I can tell you that giving people, the very, you know, hard charging senior executives feedback on how they've done in this space fuels them to be, you know, even more active and look for ways that they can contribute. So I would say that that combination of things has really helped us move into a space to kind of carry that cake analogy further. Well, and I forgot our own organization. I would say we're the icing on the cake. And I don't mean that as we're pretty, you know, flowery things, but I think of icing kind of, if you think of it like glue, you know, we provide that piece that connects all of those layers. But the thing that I think is, you know, to carry that cake analogy a little bit further, our goal in all of that is to help that sense of belonging be baked into our culture. So that's how I would say that we are helping our seniors get more comfortable in this space.
Okay, so speaking of baking in, recognizing that we have some questions in, and I'd like to pose one to you, Scott. So we have one from the audience. Before I get to it, though, I want to remind us that audience engagement for this program is being sponsored by Northrop Grumman today, so thank you very much for that. And again, speaking of baking in, a lot about connectivity, Scott. I read in your extended bio that you actually oversee a lot of ERGs, a lot of employee resource groups. And some of what was just being discussed by Liz is this idea that it's your culture too. There's all these things threaded across. So let me read you the direct question. I'd like to get your thoughts on it.
Okay.
How do we ensure employees understand that diversity and inclusion is something we should take seriously and not just lip service to an important issue? So how do you as a leader do that, given that you're connected to these ERGs and they come out with recommendations, but again, you know, getting people to take it seriously and all that sort of stuff? What would you say to that?
Yeah, Chris, thanks for the question. I was getting nervous following all the esteemed answers. Fresh question on the table, so that's good for me. I'll say, going back to employee resource groups, they were a source of strength for GDIT in the past year especially. We had them established before 2020, but I would say they became even more safe places for allies and people of a particular group that would identify with that ERG. Our Black Employee Network particularly became a warm but honest place to grapple with things that were happening outside of a work environment, but very much affect how we bring ourselves to work. And I'd say that the allyship I've grown to appreciate through our ERGs more than what we can read about allyship if we were to research it. And that's where I think active allyship, engaged allyship, courageous allyship becomes more lived when we have to engage with colleagues who are sharing deeply personal lived experiences, prompted or triggered by what's happening outside in the world, brought into the work environment. And for many of us, I'll speak as a white man, for many of our white colleagues attending Black Employee Network events over the past year, we were on this accelerated understanding of the reality that our colleagues sitting next to us every day, doing the mission work to serve the IC and all of our other important customer missions. Many of our colleagues were struggling coming to work, putting those things aside, trying to focus when having a discussion, even if it was a short one, of getting beyond how are you doing today and making it okay to say, I'm not great today. And our leaders and managers, Liz, to your point, as we equip all the layers of the cake, our leaders and managers, we want to be equipped to say, what support do you need from me today? Because no longer, I think for our organization, through our ERGs and through the other efforts that we're doing, is a leader's responsibility to say, well, we can't talk about that at work, or I don't even know how to have that conversation. And we're on this path to make sure that people are equipped and feel ready for those conversations. But as we all know, we also can't script them down to pull the book out, turn to that part of the chapter and start reading from the questions you should say. It's got to come from our authentic leadership for sure. But our ERGs became the place where we could then build out from there and say, as it goes back to our desks and our cubicles and the offices that we work in, our homes, as we all know from the last 16 months, I can be more culturally competent to navigate conversations and ask people and create safety in a one-on-one situation or in our teams and say, I really do need to know how you're doing and what support you need from me today and any day. And we will get focused back on the work, but sometimes it's a 5-minute conversation that carries to a later part of the day, or please come to our Black Employee Network virtual chat on Tuesday evening for us to process this together. I have learned so much there. So our ERGs continue to be this light in the organization that are showing us the way. And as Bridget and others were saying, we're realizing that the asset that is our robust ERG communities are now informing our D&I strategy. For example, I'm having a meeting with our BEN, Black Employee Network this evening with my deputy, and we're going to share, not to bring answers, here's all the answers for our path ahead on D&I, but here's what we're thinking. What are we missing? What's not part of this experience that you would need to see? And even can we get aligned on what success looks like? We're fine admitting we don't have all those answers, but we continue to find so much value in authentic ERG engagement. So I'll leave it there, Chris. I hope I got toward that question.
Yeah, but only on days that end in Y. So I heard you talk about really 3 things there. You talked about courageous allyship. You talked about sort of the positive ripple effects of that, but also, more importantly, the accelerated understanding and actions, which really leads me to a question for you, Vienna, that again comes from our audience. So the first question started out with, how do we get employees in general to care? There are some feelings that top leadership has started caring a lot more, that your everyday employees are starting to feel it more because maybe the interconnectedness they have. But the question from the audience is, what about middle managers? So I guess my question to you is twofold. Has it been your experience that there's a challenge with middle managers getting on board with this? And if so, what are some of the things that can be done to try to bring them more to the table?
Thanks for the question, Chris. So, as what was already expressed, it starts from the top, and our directors, Director Sharp and Deputy Director Dixon, have been more than supportive, and the Senior Executive Corps to help to educate on why this is so critical to our mission. You asked before, it's like, how do we get people to care? Well, how do we get people involved? You can't have a future way forward with any mission that's represented here unless those values and goals that you're aspiring to meet are aligned with your organizational goals and where you're trying to go. When we set forth our diversity and inclusion initiatives and also our cultural initiatives and human capital initiatives, they have to be in alignment with where we're trying to go as an agency. And making sure that we are measuring that along the way to ensure that we have the right talent, the right skills, the right representation, the diversity of thought, the perspectives that were articulated before. So we can't do that without our middle management. We can't do that without our supervisors and first line management, because they're about the care and feeding of our workforce and helping to shape what their employee experience is, to help translate what those corporate goals are down to what they do on a day-to-day basis, ensuring that they understand how they can further thrive and develop as professionals in whatever profession that they're in, that it's tied back to how does that connect to what NGA is shooting for geospatial intelligence. And so when you have that marriage between what we're doing at the individual level and marrying that with all the way to the corporate goals and ensuring that there is communication and translation and teaching and education at all levels, then we're in a good place to be able to put that forward. One of the things that we're doing at NGA, and Chris, it was introduced in your bio, as you started off as our first culture executive, we have another culture executive that following you, who has been at work building a robust assessment in terms of where we are today as NGA, and if where we are today as NGA will allow us to meet our mission imperatives of tomorrow. And taking a look at that culture all around to ensure that where we need to pay attention to, we can put toward action and building toward that future, so that when we do arrive there, that we're there with confidence. And not that we're not confident today, but we know with every organization can afford to do an introspection and ensure that what we're putting down and espousing in terms of our values is what we're living on a day-to-day basis. And so that our customers also recognize that and the intrinsic values that we give to them related to our mission. So you asked, as a long answer to your question, but in terms of middle management, it's involving them. We have supervisory councils and a supervisory council for NGA, as well as an employee council who reports directly to our director, who gives the thoughts and ideas in terms of how we can build that core of our workforce and speaking on the voice of the employees and us taking action in terms of those ideas. And it's been in place for a very long time. And so we rely on every segment of our population to be able to move forward, and all are invited and welcome to share those thoughts.
Not a long answer at all. So as usual, you're the bee's knees and the wings. So it's our audience who have given us another great question, and over to you, Bridget. So as Vieta talks about the culture, and we go from this idea that, how do we get all employees? How do we get that middle management? There's a question from the group that's like, okay, but how do you avoid groupthink? So you have everybody sort of at least leaned in to whatever degree they're leaned in, but how do you avoid that groupthink while trying to get a belonging, while also trying to increase belonging?
Thank you for that question. One of the ways that we're encouraging employees within SAIC to avoid groupthink is giving them the language to pivot and ask critical questions to ensure that groupthink does not take place. We recently had an inclusion video where we literally gave questions that employees should start asking when in meetings or in strategy meetings or proposal center or just a general meeting with their team. Start asking those questions, whose perspective is not in the room? If someone is silent, having that, empowering that disruptor or that ERG leader to say, well, Lisa's quiet. Let's get her opinion on this. And if someone interrupts her, then someone say, let's go back to what Lisa was saying. So again, we're giving actual everyday language to employees to start the courageous conversations of disrupting groupthink. We believe in SAIC that diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly as we really start focusing on belonging and our culture, it starts with our leadership from top down. And so we're building our DE&I practice by educating our executive leadership first, and then our top 200 leaders, and then we're expanding out to the top 2,500 leaders. So again, we're cascading and going down in the organization layer by layer to disrupt groupthink and encourage the proper behavior to support our culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's not easy. Again, we're asking our leaders to set the tone, to disrupt those conversations and providing them the support, the tools, and holding them accountable. We've heard about accountability in this meeting today. Accountability is critical to any DE&I effort. And so again, we're giving the language and the tools, Chris, to ensure that we disrupt groupthink in our organization.
I really love that, because even as you try to invite people in, they're not always going to know how to show up, and you're trying to help them figure out how to show up. And that actually brings us to you, Megan, and another question from the audience. What has been the most effective way for you to invite and include quote unquote outsiders, so people who might not normally be at the table?
That's good. So to build on what Scott was talking about, ERGs, right? The concept of different groups that are specific to a different, underrepresentation or something of that nature, right? Allowing people to form those groups and to have those conversations and work through that. And then mentorship, right? It's a big one for me, but it keep coming back to that, right? We've started a couple different mentorship opportunities within ARL in the last couple of years, working with people to partner them with different ways, some of them technical, but some of them also just work-life balance, like career growth, business development, sort of where they're going, right? So to allow them to and invite them to understand a little bit and kind of see behind the curtain, to help them build the confidence, right? I do feel that some of being invited to the table then is also then having the confidence then to take that seat and to be there and to speak up and to voice your opinions and your thoughts and to be that disruptor. But that is a very hard role to take on. For some people, it's a little more natural. For some people, years of experience or a couple successful experiences, give them the ability to do that and do that better. But for other folks, that's a hill they have to climb. So helping people do that, and in some ways it's doing it yourself, but in other ways it's being that mentor and having mentorship opportunities so people can behind the scenes kind of ask those questions quietly and kind of practice it and work up to that point where they are willing to speak up in that meeting or have that counter view that seems to go against the group thing. Because it's easy to sit there and think that, well, everybody else is agreeing. There must be something wrong with the way I'm thinking about this. When really you just have this great new different perspective, and by adding that perspective, you add to your team. You help them find bugs or different ways of approaching something, or an entirely blindside thing that they were not even seeing, an unconscious bias that was part of what we were talking about or how we were approaching a problem. So I think those are good ways of doing it.
And so what you leaned into, what Bridget leaned into prior, frankly, what all of you are leaning into, and has been pointed out by one of our audience members, is really about ethics and values, right? Leadership, ethics and values leading the way. And over to you, Liz, who has spent 37 years, as you said, I guess 34, because you've been in this role for 3, and really that operations side. This question is actually perfect for you. So here's how it reads. Former D&I Clapper and other IC leaders have really said that DEI improves agencies' operational performance. So the question is, can you provide specific examples of DEI-generated performance enhancements? And I want to read the rest of it. It's a couple more words, not assertions, facts, and logic. What would you say to that?
So, yes. So when you think about our national security mission and operational roles and functions that we perform, it's critical that we have people who bring diverse backgrounds and perspectives, skills and abilities into that space to help us understand the adversaries. And I'm not going to go into specific outcomes, but for sure, having people with different backgrounds helps us perform our national security mission. And I would say it's not just the adversaries that we might be concerned about. We also, I think, having those diverse perspectives and backgrounds helps us appreciate and understand the people of our country that we have sworn to protect and serve. And so I think there are countless examples of mission successes that would not be possible if we did not have diverse teams with different backgrounds working to solve the hard challenges that we face every single day. Again, I'm limited on what I can say in this forum, but there are many of those contributions daily.
Yeah, so Liz, if I could just build on that, because I completely agree with that entirely. So one really good industry example of that, right? So I work a lot in artificial intelligence, machine learning. So Google had an example of a machine learning algorithm that they developed and worked on for agents on something. It's supposed to be able to listen to certain voice recognition and things like that. And then when it first came out, it did not understand or recognize female voices or other things with different annotations. And they went back and looked at this and how big of a failure it was. And it really came down to the fact that their entire technical team was all male. And they didn't have anyone with slight accents or other different kinds of backgrounds or things on their team. So without that diversity on your team when you're developing something, right, you do end up in kind of that group thing and you create a product that's really just about who's on your team. So if we're trying to create something on a national security level, be really strategic about something, and we want it to work and work well, we need to have all representations in the room, right? Because they're going to see things and incorporate things. So that's one industry example.
And Chris,
Well,
I
I'm
want
glad-
to
I'm
build
glad
off
you
of
did.
that if you don't mind. Great question. I was wondering when I could really bring in this wonderful best practice that NGA has put in place, and that's our neurodiversity program. We're really excited about this, and we started it back in June 2020 in partnership with MITRE, and we agreed to do a pilot. And what it involves is inviting people, as we've been discussing, with different ways to give their gifts and talents to contribute to our mission. And in this respect, we're partnering with Melwood and with persons with autism on autism spectrum. This is not a first time this has been done. Many of our partners have started such projects such as this, as well as in the private sector, where we built a pilot to have a handful of candidates that are data analysts that understand AI and ML, and working with them to have a pilot to introduce them to NGA, and in the hopes for over 6 months and interviewing them and working with them on projects through Melwood, be able to bring them into NGA as full-time employees. We're happy to say that we will be hiring them, and they're being hired as we speak, to come in and be full-time. And it's important that that this answers the question, because we're recognizing that persons with autism and as well as other rare gifts have inherent abilities to process data and recognize patterns in ways that neurotypical people don't. And so we're really excited about bringing this new talent into our workforce. And let me say that it wasn't without a huge coalition of the willing across NGA, from our human resources to our diversity and equity partners to our general counsel partners, security installations, all working together to ensure that we can open the door to opportunity and be able to take part in this pilot and make for great careers and partnerships with this new talent. So we're just really excited about that. And I know I could go on and on about this, but for the sake of time, I'll stop there and take their other questions later.
Well, actually, I was going to take this particular question out to everybody anyway, because we hear it so often, like, what's the business case for diversity sort of thing. So Bridget, what would you add to this response?
What I would add, and all of the panel members hit most of the most salient points, but there are enough research out there that shows that having a diverse, equitable, inclusive culture and environment, that it improves business outcomes. It's best for having a creative and innovative environment. So it really does impact the bottom line. And that's the business case. But what I love, and it's something that Vieta mentioned, one of the things that we recently started exploring at SEIC, we created an accessibility ERG to really lean into visible and non-visible disabilities, including mental health and neurodiversity. And as a parent of a son with autism, I'm super excited about the things that you're now doing in tapping into this talent, because again, it is definitely a talent that warrants a voice and opportunities in our government and corporations. So I'm super excited about that. But again, there's a business case to get back to your question, for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's important to understand the story of your organization, and that's looking at the data and taking the time to really do an assessment, a very comprehensive assessment. We did all the focus groups, digital conversations. We also, we did the employee survey. I looked at the core metrics of an organization and then brought in a third party, synthesized all of this data, and was able to then understand SEIC's story and where we needed to make our investments, set our priorities, and really lean in to executing our strategy around DE&I. And again, that warranted us adding additional ERGs and really giving our ERGs a voice at the table. They're leaning into and sitting at the table when we have senior leadership discussions on the future of work. In addition to that, they're at the table when we're making CEO awards. They're telling us who should be considered. All these discussions were not available to ERG leaders prior to this year. So again, we're taking a hard look and really differentiating our employee experience in SAIC.
Love the answers within the questions within the answers. Over to you, Scott.
Just one brief footnote. I think the business case, as some have said already, it's documented, and it's every day we're spending time to convince people that we need more data or business rationale. Is a day we're not pushing forward on what we have to do. So at some point that train has left the station. I'm unfortunately not fighting those headwinds in my current organization, in the current discussions in my organization. But I'll say one thing we learned last year about the extra business case, and I'm not a data scientist, but I don't know how I can measure it, but I know it's there. So I'd love to help offline from anyone on this panel. Diversity and inclusion is resilience. We needed diversity more than ever in the past year, and that helped us focus, make people seen and heard. And I don't have a metric for it. It's not on our dashboard. We can't look at it maybe 10 ways that someone would want to dig into it. But I know getting to the other side of the moment that we're in has everything to do with the fact that we were, Chris, to use your term, leaning into diversity and more intentional about inclusion and diversity. So if I'm thinking about the case, I could add business to that. I think resilience is a word I wouldn't have associated about 12 months ago, but now I think it's part of our narrative and message about what we're taking forward and the why.
And I would add to that, coming out of 2020 and building on the resilience we needed just to get through it, but also the change we have seen overall, I think nationwide, and folks and what they reassessed in that time, right? And it was a very anxious, very difficult time. People really found them saying, okay, what is meaningful to me? Why do I do all the different things that I do? What is a part of my life? What am I going to really want to incorporate back into my life? What direction do I want to take coming out of this pandemic? And I think now when it comes to work and employers and what you're doing, people want really meaningful work. They want purposeful work. They want to know that they're in a good work environment. They want to know that their colleagues and their management are there for them, that their overall company posture is one of strong moral and ethical direction, and that they are following through on that. And I think now with remote work and all the different options that people have coming out of this and just sort of the overall change in the landscape, people are going to leave those managers and they're going to leave those companies that aren't meeting their standards and their needs in those areas. And a lot of that builds on and is a part of the whole DEI space and what we have. So I know for our group, our leadership is really looking at what that is and working on retention within our company, because there's are opportunities now for people to go and work remotely somewhere else. And so we want to keep our good people. And so we do that by having a really good environment and really following through on all those goals and those promises and then those standards that we set for ourselves.
And just looking at the time, I know there's only a few minutes left. I'm trying to see if we have even time for one more question. Let me look at. So we might have time for one more question, and I'll pop it back over to you, Liz. What is something that you've seen work in terms of creating an environment where people can have safe conversations? So we're trying to talk more, we're trying to get real about dialogue and what's happening. What is one best practice you've seen to enable that kind of environment?
Yeah, so we have facilitators here who have, we've put out invitations to have, conversations in small groups. We set the ground rules of, trying to create a safe space. For some people, even despite what you say, it doesn't feel safe. So, I think it's not a once and done. The ones that I've seen do that most successfully have created ongoing relationships that are grounded in, some vulnerability to start with on all parties, and then, that develops into trust to take it even further. But to make those opportunities available at work and outside of work, but with work groups and people from, in some cases it works better from across organizations, from different elements, because they feel safer not being with the teammates, to share some of their deepest vulnerabilities. But our ERGs, our employee resource groups, have also been helpful in creating those opportunities and invitations, and then we will bring trained facilitators to come in and help with that. So I would say that has been very effective, especially over the past year.
And Chris, if I could just take 30 seconds to add to Liz. Echoing what Megan mentioned earlier about 2020, everybody was in the same place with COVID-19. And one of the things that we saw was very effective, and we continue to do today, is the outreach to our workforce to ensure that they knew that their leadership was accessible, that we were available, that we answered the hardest question, or if we didn't know, we would go back and research it and come back to them. This communication just didn't resonate at the working level. It was from the director on down on a weekly basis in emails, town halls, virtual town halls, that then cascaded to directorate town halls, then office town halls, group or other teams that would bring together and continuous dialogue with employees to give them that platform to ask any question that they had about what does the future hold relative to this pandemic? Am I safe? Can I come back to work? Am I able to still contribute to my mission? Those kinds of questions were answered on a regular basis through a myriad of communiques that really did help employees feel that they could reach to the highest levels of NGA and to know that their voice mattered and that their question would be heard and answered. And we still continue that today, even as we're moving past COVID and having to reconcile with other variants that are out there, but we are still keeping up that practice because we know that employees received that and they felt more engaged and belonged and knew that they were cared for.
Thank you for that. And I want to acknowledge, for those who might wonder, so Scott was accidentally dropped. It wasn't intentional. So if he's not able to return, we want to thank him for his part in the panel. And I believe this is the time where I'm going to reintroduce our friend John Doyen, who kicked this all off. And I will personally thank the panel for all your contributions, and particularly your on-the-fly ability to just answer questions as they come. Truly what a panel is supposed to be. So sincerely, I appreciate it. Oh, there's Scott. We were talking about you behind your back. Sorry, not sorry. And I might be completely off with my timing. Don't laugh, Yetta. I'll see you one of these days. Hello, John.
Hey, thank you so much, Chris. Wow, what a great discussion. I want to thank you, Chris, for moderating this afternoon, and thanks to all our panelists for your candid and thoughtful. Really great. And once again, I'd like to thank Raytheon Intelligence and Space, as well as all our sponsors whose support ensures we can deliver this type of programming. If you were late to this afternoon's program, all registered attendees will be emailed links to all session recordings next week, so you won't miss anything. Looking ahead, tomorrow at 2:00 p.m., we'll be empowering the next generation of female leaders discussion. And on Thursday at 2:00, Lieutenant General Mary O'Brien, the Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff for ISR and Cyber Effects Operations, will deliver keynote remarks, followed by a moderated Q&A with former PDD&I Sue Gordon. And Thursday, starting at 5:00, INSA will hold its first in-person networking event, nearly 16 months, at Grand Cru in Arlington. I'm very much looking forward to seeing many of you there. We close out the week on Friday with a conversation with the CIO of the CIA, Julianne Galena, and her sister, Chris Lovejoy, who's the global head of cybersecurity for Ernst & Young. They will share their experiences rising to the top in male-dominated fields and the importance of strong female role models. And finally, a survey will pop up at the end of the broadcast. Please take a moment to let us know how we did. We value your feedback. So this concludes today's program. Stay safe and healthy, and we look forward to welcoming you back tomorrow at 2:00 p.m.